In the summer of 216 BC, beneath the blazing sun of southern Italy, two worlds collided in a storm of blood and brilliance. A Carthaginian general, forged by hate and genius, stood against the might of Rome itself. His name was Hannibal Barca, and on the fields of Cannae, he would rewrite the art of war. But behind this legendary victory lies something darker, secrets of lost strategy, forbidden knowledge, and whispers that the Vatican itself once tried to bury. Long before the banners of Rome cast their shadow across Europe, another power sought dominion. Carthage, the jewel of the western Mediterranean. A city of merchants and sailors, its wealth glittered upon the waves, but its heart burned with vengeance. For in the First Punic War, Rome had humbled Carthage, stripped it of Sicily, and demanded gold, humiliation paid in blood and silver. From the ashes of defeat rose a family sworn to vengeance, the Barcas. Hamilcar Barca, the father of Hannibal, had watched the fall of his city with fury in his eyes. He made his son swear a sacred oath, an oath before Baal, the Carthaginian god of fire and war, that he would never be a friend to Rome. And so began a vendetta that would shake the ancient world. Years later, Hannibal would rise, young, daring, and brilliant beyond measure. From Spain he built an army that was less an army and more a storm. Africans, Gauls, Numidians, men who followed him not out of loyalty, but out of awe. When Rome demanded he stop expanding, Hannibal answered not with words, but with war. In 218 BC, he crossed the impossible, the Alps, an act so daring it still echoes through history. Elephants trampled through snow, men froze to death, but Hannibal's eyes, those dark, calculating eyes, never blinked. He descended into Italy like a phantom from another world, but Cannae was not his first triumph. He had already bled Rome at Trebia and Lake Trasimene, where entire legions vanished in fog and ambush. Rome, for the first time in its history, trembled, and so in 216 BC, Rome gathered everything it had left, nearly 80,000 men, to crush Hannibal once and for all. Two consuls led them, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, one cautious, one reckless. Together they would march into the most perfect trap in military history. But what Hannibal planned at Cannae, some say it wasn't just strategy. Some say it was insight drawn from something far more ancient. In the depths of the Vatican Archives, among scrolls never meant to be read, there are references to Barca's Circle, an early tactical manuscript rumored to describe the mind of Hannibal himself, a document so precise in its geometry of destruction that later generals, from Scipio to Napoleon, would study its echoes. But this manuscript vanished. The Vatican denies its existence, calling it myth, yet among military historians, whispers persist. Could Hannibal's tactics have been inspired by something older? Some claim Phoenician knowledge, secrets passed down from Tyre, where priest kings studied the stars not just for navigation but for war. The idea that battle could mirror the heavens, that every soldier moved like a constellation. Cannae, they say, was a celestial alignment turned deadly. At dawn on August 2nd, 216 BC, the plains near Cannae shimmered with heat. Dust rose like smoke. The Roman army stretched wide, a wall of red and bronze. Confident in their sheer numbers, Hannibal's forces, outnumbered nearly 2-1, stood waiting, silent. No fortress, no high ground, just open fields. To the Romans, it seemed madness. But that was the genius of Hannibal. He arranged his troops in a crescent, weak in the center, strong on the sides. To Rome, it looked like weakness, but to Hannibal, it was a snare. As the Roman infantry advanced, crushing forward, Hannibal's center bent, but did not break. The crescent folded backward, pulling the Romans deeper in, until they were surrounded on all sides. Cavalry struck from behind. Spears pierced from every angle. The Roman army, the pride of the Republic, was swallowed whole. It was more than a victory. It was annihilation. 50,000 Romans died that day. Blood soaked the plains. The The gods, it seemed, had chosen Hannibal. But legends say that after the battle, Hannibal stood among the dead in silence, as if he too feared what he had unleashed. For even victory has its curse. Centuries later, medieval scholars would claim that Hannibal's victory was preserved in a forbidden geometry, a tactical perfection that defied divine order. Some even suggest that the early church, when compiling forbidden texts in the secret vaults beneath the Vatican, sealed away any mention of Hannibal's methods, for fear that man, armed with such knowledge, could play God on the battlefield. Cannae was not just a battle. It was a revelation of intellect, of strategy, and of terror, a moment when one man, born of vengeance, mastered death itself. But even Hannibal, the undefeated genius, could not escape the shadow of fate. For what the gods give, they always take back. The morning of August 2nd, 216 BC, began in silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, heavy, and watching. The Roman legions, shoulder to shoulder, stood like an iron tide waiting to crash. Dust clung to their armor, the heat pressing down like a curse. Across the plain, Hannibal's army waited, smaller, but still, their lines breathing in unison like a single creature ready to strike. Hannibal himself sat upon his horse, calm, unreadable, his gaze fixed on the Roman host that outnumbered him 2-1. He did not fear them. He had already seen their pride, their anger, their blindness. He knew exactly what they would do. As the sun rose, Varro gave the signal to advance. Trumpets blared. The Roman army moved forward, a vast sea of shields and spears rolling across the plain. The ground trembled under the weight of tens of thousands of feet. They believed they would crush Hannibal with sheer numbers. But the Carthaginian general had crafted something more terrible than any weapon Rome had ever faced. A design of death so perfect that even centuries later, scholars would call it divine. Hannibal placed his weakest troops in the center, Gauls and Spaniards, men who had fought and bled with him for years. On the wings, he stationed his elite African infantry, the veterans hardened from endless wars. His cavalry, Numidians swift as lightning, waited on the flanks. The Romans looked upon this and laughed. They saw a fragile line, a broken center, a fool's formation. But Hannibal was baiting them, guiding their every step. As the Roman legions surged forward, they met the Carthaginian center head-on. Swords clashed, shields splintered, men screamed. The center of Hannibal's line began to buckle, slowly retreating. It looked like collapse. The Romans pressed harder, sensing victory. They crowded closer, tightening their ranks, pushing deeper into the curve of Hannibal's formation. And that is when the trap closed. The wings of Hannibal's army, the African veterans, swept inward like the jaws of a serpent. The Roman mass, now packed so tightly that movement was almost impossible, suddenly found itself surrounded. From behind came the thunder of cavalry. Hannibal's Numidians, having driven off the Roman horsemen, now charged into the rear of the Roman line. There was nowhere to run. The battlefield became a tomb. Men screamed for air, for space, for mercy, but there was none. The Romans were crushed together so tightly that some suffocated standing upright, unable to raise their arms. The Carthaginians moved through the mass methodically, cutting, stabbing, slaughtering. The sun climbed higher, and the air filled with the stench of blood and iron. It is said the river that ran near Cannae ran red that day, thick with the dead of Rome. 80,000 had entered the field. Half would never rise again. The survivors spoke of it like a nightmare that never ended. The ground itself seemed to reject the weight of the fallen. Corpses lay stacked in heaps taller than a man. The cries of the dying echoed long into the night. Hannibal's victory was absolute, so complete that even his own officers stood in awe and horror. Later writers would say that Hannibal walked the battlefield in silence. He saw what he had done, not just defeated an army, but broken the very soul of Rome. Yet even as the wind carried the smell of death across the fields, he felt no triumph, only a strange hollow stillness. For in that moment, Hannibal had achieved perfection, and perfection is always cursed. Roman historians would later call Cannae the darkest day in their history. Entire families were wiped out in a single afternoon. The Senate, in desperation, forbade the word peace to be spoken in the city. Mothers shaved their heads in mourning, temples filled with the cries of priests begging the gods for mercy. But some claimed there was more to this story, that Hannibal's victory was not merely strategy, but sorcery, a manipulation of chaos itself. There were whispers in later centuries that among the Vatican's forbidden manuscripts, deep within the secret archives, lies a reference to a lost Carthaginian scroll known as the Codex of Baal. According to myth, the Codex was said to contain a philosophy of war drawn not from mortal logic, but from divine mathematics, the geometry of life and death. Its patterns mirrored the stars, its designs echoing the structure of creation itself. Hannibal, it was said, had been taught fragments of this knowledge by priests of Carthage, remnants of an ancient Phoenician order. The Church, centuries later, would brand such texts heretical. For if the act of war could be reduced to divine proportion, then man could imitate the will of God, and that was forbidden. Yet even today, historians studying Hannibal's tactics admit something strange. His encirclement at Cannae was so mathematically perfect, so impossibly timed, that it should not have worked. With no maps, no aerial view, no way to see the battlefield as a whole, he orchestrated movements across miles, with precision modern commanders struggled to match. It was as if he could see the pattern of the battle from above, as if he already knew how it would end. Some scholars dismiss this as luck, others as genius. But those who have studied the darker side of history, the hidden records, the coded texts locked away in the Vatican's underground vaults, suggest another possibility. They believe Hannibal had access to something more profound, something humanity was never meant to rediscover. Perhaps that is why Barca's Circle, the mysterious manuscript describing Hannibal's methods, vanished from every known archive. Perhaps it was not destroyed, but hidden, buried beneath centuries of silence, guarded by those who feared its return. But on that day in 216 BC, Hannibal did not think of forbidden knowledge or divine geometry. He simply watched as the Roman Republic bled itself dry upon his design. When the killing was done, he ordered the bodies of the Roman senators found among the dead to be gathered and burned with honor. To the rest, he gave no mercy. The message to Rome was clear: you are mortal, you are breakable. And yet Hannibal made one fatal mistake. He did not march on Rome itself. His officers begged him, strike now, while the city is weak, while its heart still bleeds. But Hannibal refused. He said Rome was like a hydra, cut off one head and another would rise. He believed he could force Rome to negotiate, to accept peace on Carthage's terms. He did not understand that Rome never surrendered. That choice would haunt him forever. Cannae was the zenith of his brilliance, but it was also the beginning of his downfall. In the years to come, the same Rome he shattered would rebuild, adapt, and hunt him across the world. But for that single day, in the furnace of southern Italy, Hannibal stood at the height of human power. To this day, the Battle of Cannae is studied in every military academy on earth. It is the blueprint of annihilation, the art of entrapment, the perfection of destruction. Yet, the Vatican's oldest whispers still linger, that Hannibal's mind touched something forbidden, that in mastering war, he came closer to mastering death itself. And perhaps, somewhere in the sealed silence of the archives, beneath frescoed ceilings and locked iron doors, a fragment of his lost wisdom still waits, etched in ancient Carthaginian script, sleeping in the dark, waiting for the day man dares to open it again. In the aftermath of Cannae, the world held its breath. The Roman Republic, once thought invincible, was broken. Entire legions had been erased from existence, their banners lost, their names never spoken again. Rome had suffered defeat before, but never like this. This was not just military loss, it was psychological devastation. The gods themselves, it seemed, had turned away. News spread like wildfire. Across Italy, cities once loyal to Rome began to waver. Capua, the second largest city, defected to Hannibal. Syracuse, in Sicily, soon followed. Even distant Greek colonies whispered that the age of Rome was over. For a fleeting moment, it seemed that the world would bow to Carthage once more. But Hannibal hesitated. Standing amidst the smoking ruins of Cannae, his victory complete, he refused to march on Rome. His officers pleaded, "Strike now, before they recover." But Hannibal's gaze was distant, haunted. He saw not triumph, but prophecy. He believed that forcing Rome to beg for peace would be more powerful than taking it by force. Yet he underestimated the will of his enemy. Rome did not break. It adapted, it hardened. In the Senate, panic was forbidden. The consuls ordered new legions to be raised, boys as young as 16, men as old as 60. Gold from temples was melted down to forge new weapons. Rome vowed that, as long as a single citizen remained, the Republic would endure. This was not courage, it was desperation transformed into defiance. And in that defiance, a new Rome was born. While Hannibal's army lingered in southern Italy, the Republic began to rebuild its strength. It changed how it fought. No more direct confrontations, no more glorious open battles. Rome learned from Hannibal. They shadowed him, bled his supply lines, avoided the traps he set. They studied the very man who had destroyed them, and in doing so, began to mirror him. Years passed. Cannae remained his masterpiece, but time became his enemy. Carthage, far away across the sea, offered little support. Reinforcements were scarce. His men grew tired, their victories smaller, their enemies wiser. Rome, however, was rising again. A new generation of generals was emerging, one of them a man who had studied Hannibal's methods in secret, Publius Cornelius Scipio. Scipio was young, patient, and ruthless. He knew that to defeat Hannibal, he had to become like him. When Scipio invaded North Africa, Hannibal was forced to return home to defend Carthage. There, at Zama in 202 BC, the two greatest minds of the age finally met face to face. The battle was fierce, brilliant, and terrible, but this time, fortune turned. Hannibal was defeated. The vengeance of the Barcas ended where it began, in the dust of Africa. Rome would never forget Cannae. It became a symbol of both terror and transformation. To some, it was proof that genius can challenge empires. To others, it was a warning that even the greatest victories contain the seeds of destruction. But beneath the surface of history, another layer remained, a darker one. Medieval scholars claimed that within the Vatican's secret vaults, there were accounts of Cannae far more detailed than any Roman record. They spoke of a lost map, said to have been drawn by Carthaginian scribes, depicting the encirclement of the Roman legions not as a tactical maneuver, but as a ritual design, a spiral, matching the patterns found on ancient Phoenician altars. Those who studied it claimed the formation itself was symbolic, a representation of Baal consuming his enemies in a divine circle of fire. Some whispered that Hannibal's genius came not from study, but from something older, something whispered to him by the priests of his ancestors. The Church, fearing such associations with pagan rites, supposedly confiscated these scrolls, sealing them within underground libraries of the Vatican, never to be read again. To this day, the Vatican denies that such documents exist. But strange references have appeared throughout history. Letters, diaries, secret commentaries by scholars granted rare glimpses into the archives. They speak of diagrams of the Cannae formation, drawn with eerie mathematical precision, accompanied by notes in Latin warning, too perfect for man, too ordered for chance. If true, These writings suggest something unsettling, that the battle was not merely a product of Hannibal's intellect, but of knowledge that predated him, knowledge that may have come from the dawn of civilization itself. Perhaps that is why history treats Cannae not only as a military marvel, but as a mystery no commander before or since has replicated its perfection. Generals from Frederick the Great to Napoleon studied it, seeking to understand the secret of encirclement, yet none achieved the same unity of chaos and control. It was as if Hannibal had glimpsed a pattern invisible to all others, a pattern of destiny itself. As centuries passed, the story of Hannibal transformed from history to legend, from legend to myth. He became more than a man, he became an idea, the embodiment of defiance, intellect, and fate. The conqueror who could master everything except time, and yet some claim that his legacy did not end in defeat. In the darker corners of Europe's libraries, there are scattered references to the Order of Badol, a secret brotherhood said to have guarded Carthaginian relics after the city's fall. Among them, fragments of tactical texts that mirror Hannibal's methods, proof, perhaps, that the knowledge survived, passed through hidden hands, shaping the art of war for centuries. Whether truth or myth, one thing endures. The Battle of Cannae remains a mirror into the mind of a man who outthought an empire. It reminds us that brilliance and madness often walk side by side, that knowledge can elevate or destroy, and that perfection in war is as close as humanity ever comes to touching the divine. Perhaps that is why whispers still persist of a sealed room within the Vatican Archives, one never opened, guarded by silence, and within it an ancient Carthaginian tablet, etched with circles and lines faintly burned by time. No one knows if it is real, no one dares to look, because if Hannibal truly mastered death at Cannae, perhaps his secret was never meant for the living. For every empire rises, every genius falls, and every forbidden truth eventually finds its way back into the light. History remembers Cannae as the field of slaughter, but perhaps, beneath the dust and bones, it was something else, a message carved into eternity, reminding us that even in the face of overwhelming power, one mind, guided by fury and fate, can still shape the course of the world. And somewhere, in the silence between history and myth, Hannibal Barca still waits, his eyes fixed on Rome, his masterpiece eternal. If this story of brilliance, vengeance, and forbidden knowledge drew you into the shadows of history, then you already know. This is just one of many mysteries the past still hides. Subscribe to Unsolved History and step deeper into the forgotten corners of our world. Every week, we uncover the secrets buried beneath centuries of silence, lost empires, hidden orders, and truths the Vatican and kings alike tried to erase. Like the video, share it with those who love the darker side of history and tell us in the comments, what do you believe happened to Hannibal's lost knowledge? Until next time, remember history is never dead, it's only waiting to be found.